Let's get started. As you can see in the screen, this session will be recorded and it will be not broadcast, but the recording will be available at any point in the upcoming weeks at the Open Access Books Network platform. So that being said, welcome to this first session for the OA Books workouts, Scholars at Work. It's a session organized by, and now my screen is not doing what I wanted it to do. Oops, there it is. Sorry, organized by the Open Access Books Network. First, we will start with a very short introduction by myself, the host of the session. Then we will hear from Janneke talking about her book project, Living Books, Experiments in the Post-Humanist Humanities. Then we will be having a Q&A. And so Janneke and I, we will start with the questions and the answers, but let's hear from you as well. So this is a very practical hands-on session, hopefully, to learn about what Janneke has done with her project in terms of publishing, writing, disseminating, etc., etc. So hopefully you have questions for Janneke as well and shoot them during the Q&A session. So as said, this is part of the this session. It's part of a series called OA Books Workouts, Scholars at Work. On the right side, you can see the 5 scheduled installations of this series. Up till January, we have these 5 scholars talking about their book project and their practices. It's part of the Open Access Books Network program. And this is a network, and you can find a discussion place on the Humanities Commons website. Here you can see the entrance page, and it is being used as share thoughts and ideas about all aspects of open access book publishing. So that can either be you as a scholar wanting to know how things are being done, or about funding, for instance, or about business models. A lot of information is being shared on this platform for all of us, for the network, to learn from. So if you haven't joined the network page, please do. If you search for Open Access Books Network, you can find it on the Humanities Commons website. And another thing I wanted to mention also in regard of these sessions, very practical sessions, is the Open Access Books Toolkit, launched last year. A very practical guide for researchers, but also others like librarians or publishers or other stakeholders involved in open access book publishing. It's a very practical guide, online toolkit to learn how to publish open access books. And just a question to all, just to have an idea of who is in the call. If you could put in a 1, a digit 1 if you are a scholar or researcher, and a 2 if you are, let's say, staff, supporting staff. So they can either be publishers, libraries, or technical infrastructure, just to have an idea of who is in the call. Let's dive into the session. Perfectly on time, 5 minutes. Janneke Adema, who is assistant professor in digital media at the Center for Post-Digital Cultures at Coventry University. And she published this book, Living Books, and we will hear more about that in her talk. Just recently, in August, at MIT Press. And in her research, in general, she explores the future of scholarly communications and experimental forms of knowledge production, where her work incorporates processual and performative publishing, radical open access, scholarly poetics, media studies, book history, cultural studies, and critical theory. And I'm extremely happy to have Janneke in the call. as a first one of the series, because basically this project, several things triggered me to organize this series, but especially this book as well, because Janneke is basically practicing what she preaches. We know each other for a long time, and I think this is a really great project. And to hear about her, the way towards the actual publishing of this book, and what she encountered and what she learned, but also pitfalls and other things to talk about. So without further ado, Janneke, the digital floor is yours to tell us a bit more about your project. And then, do you want me to stop share, or do you want me to go to the next slide?
Next slide, please.
Okay.
All right. So yeah, thank you so much, Jeroen and Open Access Book Network team, for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to say a little bit more about my book or book project or book in development, whatever you like. So yeah, and it's particularly nice. I can also see in the chat already, there's some people there that, yeah, maybe I've been following my research and this book for a while already. So it's nice to kind of be in this community too. And so, yes, I'm as Jeroen already said, I'm not going to speak as much about what the book is about or the kind of theories and arguments that it argues for, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about the practical elements behind it. So how I've published it. And this again, as Jeroen already said, it's kind of part of my research. I kind of conceptualize that as a form of critical praxis. So for me, doing scholarship is very much part of my theoretical and practical engagement with publishing to kind of develop alternatives. So what I want to say is a little bit is about how this project started. So basically, and it's kind of hard because the project itself is not something, I have to say from the start, that the way that it looks now is not the way that I've kind of envisioned it would look like at the end. So this project kind of developed iteratively. It's been a speculative project in which I've been experimenting with different kind of platforms, with different forms of software to try out and think through what the future of the book and publishing could be. And basically, I think this started for me. I did an MA in Book and Digital Media Studies back in the end of the 2000s at Leiden University. And after I finished my MA dissertation, which was on open access publishing, which was something relatively new then. It was, of course, the open access movement was around for a while already, but it started to make a little bit more inway. And I wrote a dissertation on open access and books. And based on that dissertation, I got a job working at the Awapen project, which was a groundbreaking project started in 2007 or 2008, I don't know exactly anymore, to look at open access models for publishing models for books, which at that point were not explored much at all yet, and were even seen as kind of an ideal that would be hard to realize. So when I started to work on the Awapen project as a researcher looking into business models, user needs, etc., I also started to keep a blog that partly related to the work I was doing at Awapen, but also kind of research interests in general I had around the future of publishing and the book. So this blog, Open Reflections, started in 2008. And I used it to kind of start sharing ideas and to kind of put down drafts of things that I was working on, conference reports and things like that. So around 2008, I think that the blogosphere, or whatever we called it at that point, was still quite active in certain fields, so in media studies and digital humanities. So that was actually a time when there was quite a lot of interaction around blogs and commenting functions. RSS was still alive and kicking. And so it was a kind of a really nice environment to create communities around research. So after the Awapen project ended, I started doing a PhD at Coventry University with Gary Hall, who himself was a yeah, a big advocate and pioneer in open access publishing as part of Open Humanities Press. And I decided that I wanted to make the blog the kind of the topic of my thesis, or the kind of the way that I would be producing the thesis. And at that point, that was quite a challenge, because I remember that I had to sign some kind of PhD contract stating things like nothing can be published before, and you can't publish things openly. So we had to have quite a few conversations around what that would mean then to blog a thesis openly. And of course, this is now something that's much more established, but at that point I was still quite out there. So I started using the blog as a research blog to publish work in progress, first ideas, and also to make connections with others. And so you can see here, so in the slide here on the left bottom, that's just a screenshot from the blog. And this is a bit later during my thesis, in which I started to kind of publish whole chunks of chapters when I was almost finished. And when I finished the thesis, and the blog was kind of a diving board or springboard to other kind of projects too. So it kind of fitted in with all kinds of other practical projects that I was involved in. And when I finished my PhD, I had to publish it in a formal version too. So it had to be in print, in PDF, and it needed to be bound in a certain specific format. So I couldn't kind of get away from that. So I couldn't just submit the blog itself and its various instantiations as my PhD research. So I did both. So I submitted that version, and I submitted two different versions, because two of the platforms that I had been experimenting with quite a lot, one of them were wikis. So I did a wiki version of my thesis. And I was really inspired by the experiments with comment press from people like Kathleen Fitzpatrick, who've been using that, which allows comments in the margins of the text. So I also published a version of the thesis in comment press. So in that sense, it was a kind of an iterative or a differential thesis. That's how I call it. And so yeah, it existed already in different versions on different platforms. So after the thesis was published, was submitted, and I graduated, and I started to look for a publisher, or kind of turning it into a book project, right? What is like the expectation of our fields to kind of to get along in our careers. So at first, what I did is I wanted to keep alive this kind of experimental spirit that I've been doing, and I've been influenced by remix studies and things like that. So I was interested in doing a kind of a remix project in which versions or in which my book would be remixed or versioned by other scholars, and those then would again also be published alongside the book. Of course, this is a very conceptual and kind of nice ideological idea, but when I actually started contacting publishers around this, nobody responded. So that was basically me learning a lesson that probably these kind of conceptual ideas are not what publishers are necessarily looking for. So I kind of compromised and submitted a kind of a more standard or traditional book proposal. And I was also told, do that first. That was the advice I was given. And then once you're in somewhere, then bring in all the wacky experimental stuff that you want to do. So in retrospect, I'm not quite sure whether that was the right strategy. Probably not. And I probably wouldn't advise people to do that now. But it did get me a book contract with the MIT Press, which I was really excited about, because the Leonardo series published a lot of kind of books that I was really inspired by, and the MIT Press, of course, has a history of publishing open access and experimental work. However, unfortunately, when I started to broach the concept of doing my book in an experimental way and in open access, all of that became a little bit more complicated, because the Leonardo series has kind of an established format, so they couldn't do too much formal experimentation within that. And the press had moved away from delayed green open access towards, basically a BPC-based model at that point. And so they were really kind of supportive of me having an open access version, but it would mean finding a grant or fee to pay for that. So that was something that I looked into, but it didn't really work out. And luckily the press was quite supportive. That in the end they said, like, we're going to publish it open access anyway. And that basically also happened at the same time that they were working towards or looking at new funding models, non-BBC based ones, to support their open access books. So I think I kind of, in an opportune moment, I broached the concept of open access again. So basically that enabled me then to publish it in open access. And if I can have the next slide, please. And the other thing that I did is that I negotiated a license that allowed reuse and remix. And that is important for me because that versioned element that I talked about, I'd already been releasing it in a kind of versioned way, in a remixed way, in a collaborative way. So for it then to kind of be cut down in that sense didn't really make a lot of sense to me. And then luckily, I got in touch with the pop-up people around an article that I was going to write about versioning for them. And they said, like, hey, do you also want to have your book available on pop-up? And that was a really great opportunity because that allowed me to kind of keep the book alive in a way that I'd been doing previously. So I was then able to, or I am now able to kind of version it and update it further. You can add comments in the margins. And I think that kind of brings it back again also to the blog kind of form that it had more than 10 years ago now. So I kind of like the circle that it's, that it's come back to again. And that's what we are at now. And I'm really excited about having these different versions again now. So there's a print book, which again is also required for assessment and for kind of the kind of prestige that comes with publishing. There is an open access PDF that goes into libraries, etc. And then there is the pop-up version, which allows commenting and further updating and versioning. And so one of the things that I'll be looking at is how I can, what I can do around the pop-up version going forward. So one of the things that I've already started doing is see how I can kind of curate some conversations in the margins of the book. And one of the things that's just been published today is an interview that the lovely Elizabeth Tochifra did with me about the publishing process, and I can tweet that afterwards to those of you who follow me on Twitter. And we've done that interview in the margins of the book, and it will also be published on the RIA Open blog. So that's kind of a way that I am trying to kind of keep the project alive going further to into the future. And yeah, that's where we're at now, and that's what I did. So I hope that explains it a bit. And if anybody has any questions, because there's probably lots more that I can say, but that's it, I guess.
Oh, I think I was on mute. Thanks, Janneke. What I really like is this, and you already talked about it, this versioning. But on the more practical side, two questions. How is the publisher, so in this case the MIT Press, it's the print version, and the other one is on pop-up. How will the press be supportive to, let's say, iterative printed versions as well? First question. Yeah, maybe first respond.
I don't know.
So how does the publisher supports this sort of iterative versioning way of working?
Yeah, so basically, I think it was the Knowledge Futures group who got in touch with me around doing a version on pop-up, and then I checked with the press to see if they're, and of course, because they've been kind of experimenting with that already, so they've got various books on pop-up, so they were very supportive of that. And one specific conversation I did have was that I wanted the version on pop-up to be different. So I want to be able to update that. So it will start to diverge from the print version. And one thing I did is I added a little bit more images to the book. There are more hyperlinks and things in there. And I also adapted the text slightly because it's kind of a meta-reflective book anyway. So in some aspects, it says like in the print or PDF version that you're reading now. So I kind of adapted that, and I wrote a little bit about pop-up and just to kind of adapt it again to that platform. So in principle, if you read it on pop-up, it's not that different. The argument is the same, but there is still a slight different. It is a different version conceptually and materially from the print version. I'm not quite sure if they would be up for doing new print versions. I haven't asked them that, but I could. That might be quite interesting. But at the moment, I mean, it still feels very fresh that it's been published, and the pop-up kind of edition was something that happened over summer, so it also kind of felt quite new. And I'm still kind of getting my head around what I want to do with that and what kind of opportunities the platform enables in that sense. And that's also how I previously have been dealing with different platforms that I've used, to kind of just try them out and see, what you can do with them.
Yeah, thanks. And so with this project, but also with your previous work, you're constantly stretching the boundaries of the traditional concepts. Let's say, what is a digital book, but also what influences the open practices, the scholarship. We all live in a let's say, the academics. We need to publish. And we need to publish articles, we need to publish books. In the UK, you have the ref, the killing ref with the publisher Parish Adash. How do you see yourself still working on the same project for a longer period of time? Because that's also, I think, for many an issue, right? Time, funding, progress in that sense. So maybe you could elaborate a bit more on that.
Yeah, I mean, I also don't know where the boundaries of this project are. I think that's the first thing to say.
Maybe there aren't any boundaries.
I think a lot of people have asked that too, like, oh, how did these versions map onto each other? I mean, and again, that's partly because it wasn't a predetermined plan. I didn't have this as an endpoint, at the beginning of the project. If it even is a project, it's a book, basically, right? I think for people, it's a bit easier to understand if we see it as a project, but yeah, I think, I mean, the thesis was a kind of a defined project in a way, and that consisted of different versions. But I think I've been doing a lot of research. I mean, I really see my work also as part of, as an activist practice of kind of trying to make an intervention into publishing landscape and to kind of argue for alternative ways of publishing, more open, more ethical in many ways. And so many of the kind of other research things that I've done over the last decade kind of blur in and out. It's the same argument, but kind of different aspects of it. And parts of the book research have kind of remixed into other bits and bobs. So, but there is still kind of a clear line, I think, from the thesis to the book. And it's been a long time. And I'm also in a way, I'm like, how the hell is it 10 years later now? And why did it take me so long? But and I think that comes down also to when you do a lot of experimental work, it's always a kind of, they call it, I think, the double load, right? So you're doing the experimental work next to more traditional work. So just to kind of, keep up with the kind of criteria that our institutions have and that are expected of you when you want to make career progression. And so, so in a way, having a published book with MIT was also a requirement, right, to go forward. But I'm really happy in the way that it kind of ended up, that I was able to publish in open access, that I was able to publish it in a pop-up version. And that I feel that gives me a little bit more energy again, also to kind of expand from there and connect to future research.
Yeah, and setting the example for other maybe more traditional publishers, because MIT is quite progressive, of course, but set the example for others in this case. Yeah. I have a question by Hans de Jonge from the Dutch Research Council. What about PIDs, so the persistent identifiers, which is always also with preprinting an issue. Will future versions of your book have new of other DOIs, or is there any other way of how to persist the versions in this case?
Yeah, I'm going to be I'm not going to give you the answer you want, Hans, because I'm a little bit skeptical about DOIs and persistent identifiers in the context of my research, because one of the things that I try to challenge is this kind of object formation of the book, or wanting to kind of bind things together again. And although I'm very much interested in this idea of having objects coming out of our research, and I think we need to have objects coming out of our research, but I'm not that interested in having everything preserved or available,
or archived,
or archived in that way. And I think definitely certain versions should have a DOI and should be archived, but I'm also for kind of disrupting that a little bit and thinking through whether that's always needed, right? But yeah, we'll have future versions of your book have new or other DOIs. I'm really interested in these kind of versioning aspects that are built into platforms such as Pop-Up that do allow that. And I think within the Coping project that I also work in, we've been looking into doing this kind of processual publishing in which we release reports in different versions, for example, and we're kind of working with Zenodo and trying to kind of see how we can connect the DOIs together. And so yeah, we're looking into that as part of that aspect of my work, I would say. But for this aspect of my work, I'm a bit more hesitant to kind of work with those kind of formal delineations of research.
Please keep disrupting. Yep. And this another question by Gabi, and I think that is also relating to one of my questions I had is so how is the cooperation with editors, graphic designers on an open access book? And I even maybe can extend this question to why is openness first of all important to you, but then also what did it enable you to do? And also, I guess, extended to this question in terms of production with the publisher, disseminating, but also maybe in an earlier stage.
Yeah, I mean, openness, so what it enables me to do is kind of connect to all kinds of communities, right? I think that's the most important bit. So throughout the project, being able to share my research openly meant I was able to kind of work together with people, connect to people much more directly, and also again disrupt that system, right, in its own small way. But I've always seen what I've done as part of this larger kind of movement of this open access movement or movement of people wanting to kind of rethink what publishing is. So I think that's the importance of openness there for me, lies in those aspects. And then when it comes to working with editors, graphics designers, etc. So I've worked with two different editors or kind of publishers first on this project. And the first one was a little bit more hesitant, I think, about open access. And the second one was more of a fan. And also, I think that was at the time, as I explained, when MIT was really trying to move over to. So I think the conversation was a little bit easier. And I think it was also a matter of me and the lovely reviewers of my book who've also kind of been hammering on this needs to be in open access and just kind of repeating that really helped. And I think they have been really supportive ever since we kind of decided, yes, that's what we're going to do. Graphic designers for the book, this is an MIT press designer. And actually this was the first kind of version they sent of the front cover, and I really, really loved it. And I've been getting a lot of really nice comments on it too. So that was great. I just think, I think what they asked me to send in some examples of covers that I was inspired by. And I really like that they didn't do something with a book, if that makes any sense. Like it's normally something with books about books have a book on the cover, right? And this is more about the fluid, liquid, living aspects, which I really like. And yeah, I think so that was my experience, and I think it depends a little bit whether that's the same with other publishers. Not necessarily, I guess. I think a lot of presses, of course, are still trying to make a shift towards open access or exploring how they can do that. But I mean, especially I don't see why a press would be less interested in promoting an open access book in that sense, because first of all, this book is still available in print, so there is still a sales market, and I think, you know, it's part of a publishing motive to kind of start promoting your lists and your kind of the books in your lists, right? So I don't think there's necessarily a reason for them to be less involved.
Yep. There's a question in the chat from Paul. interesting what you said about DOIs. Would you view your book more like a fluid thing instead of a discrete object that you can slice into versions?
Yeah, I guess. But, yes and no, in the sense that, yes, I do see, I think I see researchers as fluent, and I see the book as a way to slice into it, right? And I think we need to slice into research or cut into it at some point, or in different points, actually. And what I try to kind of complicate in my project or in my book, the argument that I make is that we only cut in certain ways at the moment. So at the moment we say a book is done and then we publish it as this bound printed object, right? And then we submit it for career assessment, etc. But actually there are maybe more interesting points at which we want to bind or cut down our research. And we already do that, for example, when we share a Twitter thread or put a blog post up or give a paper at a conference. Those are all kinds of moments within the research process in which we cut it down, right? And we present it and we ask feedback, or we or we kind of submit it for assessment, or we want to collaborate with others via feedback and annotation, or so there's different moments and different reasons why we would want to cut down the research. So yeah, I do see it as something that, but it doesn't necessarily also mean it is forever fluid. I'm more interested in finding out ways that we can indeed make these incisions, but that these incisions don't mean the end of the project. And I think that's what happens a lot with restrictive copyright licenses or with signing away ownership and things like that. It kind of ends the project. And so finding ways that we can kind of make those incisions while keeping the book alive, I think that's what I'm interested in most.
And maybe if we're not talking about DOIs, and so they had the whole technical part of it. And so using tools and infrastructure. I saw your book or your project is also it grew within the radical OA conceptions and movement. So, and I know that you try to use as much as possible open source, but this can be very difficult, I think, right? And complicated as well. So maybe you can say something about PubHub is open source, yes, but you have, I think, other tools as well. So, and how do you deal with that? The complicated matter of being principled.
Yeah, I think that's really hard because I've tried to be principled, of course, but it doesn't always. I mean, so the first thing is that my blog is on the WordPress.com version, right? It's not actually the .org open source version. Mm-hmm. That was just because when I started the blog, I didn't know, around how all that stuff worked or what that meant. And actually the kind of other versions are on a WordPress.org or the kind of the open version. But I have tried to use open source software as much as possible where I could. I've also tried to publish open access as much as possible, but this wasn't as easy at the beginning of the previous decade as it was now, maybe, although it's not that easy now either. But so some of the articles and papers that I delivered were published fully open access. Some of them were green open access in repositories. Other ones were with a delayed, with a half year or a year kind of mandate on them. But I've always,
moving wall,
I've always sneakily just put them up on my blog, and I think that's been the kind, and nobody's ever said anything about that. So, which I also always say as strategy to people, if they really are hardline about your contract, just sign it and just put it up anyway. Nobody's probably going to chase you. So it's about compromises, I think, and I think this is one of the things that. The whole project was like that. It was like a process of negotiation, compromise, and kind of lowering my expectations. What I explained that I had this really ambitious idea for a book project, which then in retrospect, it's like, what was I thinking, right? Of course, that wouldn't have worked. And it's also about what you say. It's about software and platforms, and I'm not a technical person, and I've had the privilege of working a lot with with designers, with developers. And I think that's also one strategy to kind of deal with that, right? To kind of find a way to kind of navigate that environment. But it's also about, yeah, just trying out stuff and learning stuff and starting to blogging, starting to use Zotero, like really small steps, right, towards figuring out what kind of publishing platforms are out there that are not just print media. Yeah. And also kind of being curious about what they can do, even if you don't completely understand them. There's a lot of new stuff now that I don't completely understand, but I'm trying to follow along anyway. And you do get better at it. And there is that kind of element. I remember when I was doing my degree, I did a degree in book and digital media studies, they always told us, like, you're going to be the in-between person between the technical person and I do sometimes feel a bit like that, because even though I don't feel like a technical person, if you're a little bit half in the digital humanities, you're already always the one that apparently knows everything about these things. And then I'm like, no, I don't. But yeah, there's this kind of in-between position too. But yeah, my argument is always just start trying them out, these tools and technologies, and see what they can do for you and for your research. So yeah.
A question by Vanessa. Let's move into evaluation and assessment. Because I think the traditional, at least the traditional scholarly communication is heavily influenced by the assessment and the way these structures work. So version, the final version, the definitive version, and etc. But this question is really interesting, I guess, for you. So if we reinvent the way research is evaluated, what do you think the majority of academic books will look like in 10 years?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's two ways.
It can also be 5 years if that's more easy.
No, I guess it's like, how do I want to answer it? Is that the kind of future that I would like to see, or is it the future that I think will be there in 10 years, right? Because if I'm negative, then I think things won't change that rapidly, because they haven't been changing that rapidly. But I am really excited about the fact that, also in the humanities, increasingly stuff is being published in open access. There are way more opportunities to publish more experimental, multimodal work than 5 or 10 years ago. So I'm hoping we'll stay on that trajectory, right? And I'm really excited by, if I look at PTR students at my institution, they're doing such exciting work around their research, about ways that they're publishing, about writing in different voices. And so I really hope that those kind of experimental ideas kind of also work through in the way that we publish. And yeah, it's hard, because I think, as we all know, humanities is still quite conservative, and there's also a lot of resistance against the whole idea of the integrity of the academic book, and that will take some time to change. But I think we just need to keep doing it and kind of keep trying to push against making sure that these kind of research projects or experimental research projects are also accepted. And there are so many examples already, and we've been trying to, as part of the Coping project, to kind of bring a lot of them together and create typologies and showcase examples, both for authors and publishers, to show what's out there. And it is getting more accepted also as part of assessment procedures. So I do really hope that that is a forward movement. But I also think that we need to challenge assessment procedures. So it's a double movement. I don't only want kind of experimental publishing to adapt to assessment. I think assessment needs to really change, and we need to think through what that object that we assess means, instead of kind of assessing collaborative scholarship or seeing it as a kind of more
team effort, team scholarship, team science. So and I guess moving to the other question by Vanessa, which is can be seen as a follow-up probably. So we are seeing more funders fund open access books. Should they prioritize new formats to encourage change, or rather focus on improving access to important works? I think I know your answer, but
I mean, first of all, I don't necessarily think it's an either or question, but also, yes, I'm definitely, because the strategy has been the other way around, right? So it has mostly been a focus on gratis open access more than Libre open access, and I think that doesn't help, because I think also in a lot of the models that we're developing now, they're based on the book object and not on kind of more experimental and digital scholarship. So yes, I definitely would say prioritize new formats and also improve access to important works, of course, and that needs to happen. But that shouldn't go to the detriment of more liberal forms of open access, and that should definitely also be promoted. And for me, it's so important, because for all the experimental projects that I'm involved in, openness is lies at the basis of them. If you want to do things with versioning, with annotation, commenting, remixing, multimodal scholarship, all of that needs to happen in an open environment. So it is the basis. But yeah, I think it's important to highlight the remix and reuse capabilities too.
Yeah. And in order to be able to remix, and so the other question in the chat by Gabi, so do your print book and the version on the platform have the same license? First question, but then the importance of licensing and open licensing, maybe you can say something about that as well, also in your previous work and the iterations possibly.
Definitely. No, so that's a really good question, because they should be the same, but at the moment they're not. But that's actually a mistake that was already spotted quite quickly afterwards. So both the print book and the version on the MIT platform should be CC BY non-commercial, but something went wrong. So they have actually, it says if you go to the MIT Press Direct platform, it says CC BY, but then if you click on the PDFs, it says all rights reserved. But the publisher has promised me they're resolving it. And that's been 6 weeks already, and I keep pushing them. So if anybody would like to write to the publisher to say that this is a bit weird, then I would definitely encourage them. But yes, they've promised me that would be that would change. Actually, the version on Pop-Up has been licensed CC BY, and actually I wasn't really, that kind of happened accidentally, but I'm keeping it a little bit quiet, and I hope other people would too. So I don't know how quiet it would be if we're in this online environment, but actually it's a different version. So in a way, I don't think it's problematic, and it comes kind of back to the fact that I've always used open licenses, but I've also tried to kind of disrupt this reliance on Creative Commons licenses, because they still work with this kind of liberal humanist kind of idea of having to give away ownership of your work as if it's always already your ownership. So previously, by the creator, exactly. So previously, in the previous iteration of my blog, I had all kinds of different open licenses next to each other, because of course, if you don't have a license, then it's automatically copyrighted. But I thought, what would it mean if you just put 6 different open licenses next to each other? So as a kind of a conceptual play on what licensing means and what my role in that is, what does it and end up kind of confusing it in that sense. But yes, so hopefully at some point, and definitely just to say again, the open access version is CC BY NC licensed, even though it doesn't say so, but it should soon.
Okay.
And we would be interested in hearing more about who you ask about swimming in the pool.
Andrew?
That's cool.
That's something else. Okay. Looking at the clock, I guess you don't know anything about swimming pools, Janneke, but
no.
Not.
Andrew, could you put yourself on mute?
Yes.
Or Agatha, maybe you can do this in the participants list. Yeah. So looking at the time, perfectly 45 minutes. So if there are any questions left, I think this exercise is over. So I'm just waiting a few more seconds to see if someone is typing or has a final question. If not, then first of all, Janneke, thank you very much for this very insightful talk and explaining to us your endeavors and your with all the work you've done with the book, but also in the past 10 years, right, on this. And a final remark is that within the series afterwards, so after this session, within 1 week, we will publish a PDF interview with Janneke as well as part of the series. We do this for the other ones as well. So we have the online session, and then afterwards, after a week, we will publish the written interview. In this case by Janneke. So up next week, hopefully during the Open Access Week. I hope you enjoyed this session. You can find all the other ones and register for them on the Open Access Books Network page on the Humanities Commons website. Again, Janneke, thank you for your contribution, and thanks to all for joining this session. And I hope to see you at one of the other installations of the series. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good.